I'm Natalie, and today we're going to be talking about the Chicano movement and background knowledge on our first episode of our podcast. And today we're joined with our co-host,
Georgina.
And shijay.
The Chicano movement, a movement that is one of the most powerful and overlooked civil rights struggles in the U.S. The Chicano civil rights movement in the U.S. was driven by numerous factors, including education, labor, and identity.
Exactly. And to really understand the context of this movement, we must go all the way to the aftermath of the U.S. invasion and the annexation of Mexican territory in the 1840s. Mexican Americans since this event have been fighting for equal treatment, especially back to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which is how the Mexican-American border was formed, which made many Mexican citizens involuntarily Mexican American citizens, giving the famous quote, "We didn't cross the border crossed us." This primarily includes the fight for equal treatment in education.
Right. To start with, even before the famous Brown v. Board of Education case in 1954, there were Mexican American families in the Southwest challenging school segregation in court. And unfortunately, these schools for Mexican American children were underfunded, tracked primarily into labor rather than college, and also heavily overpopulated.
It was a call to the end of what scholars now call the white stream curriculum. This is a system that basically ignored and erased Latino experiences. It also punished students for speaking Spanish or expressing their culture and forbid any Spanish speaker to talk during a class or learn the education curriculum due to racist faculty, staff, and people working in the school board. That's crazy, right?
Crazy. This brings us to a primary spark of the Chicano movement itself. March 1968, thousands of Chicano students in East LA walked out of class to protest unequal education. For them, it wasn't just about textbooks themselves. It was about their personal quest for dignity, language, culture, history, and most importantly, opportunity to be represented. It was a smart tactic that was to prove how many Mexican Americans affect the school system's income, and walked out of class to force the school to change their curriculum, which the school board would eventually change, but didn't change the racism and discrimination of the people who were working there. So it wasn't very effective like they hoped.
The first organization to help Mexican Americans from public discrimination was the League of United Latin American Citizens, or LULAC, and was formed in 1929 and has solved most of the problems at hand. After the LA walkouts, many Mexicans at 17 different states felt that they need to organize a now organization que se llama Mayo. The organization publicly protested the poverty and injustice faced by some Hispanics, denounces incidents or exclusive employment policies and police brutality. It also organized walkouts in the public schools of Ercoch, Elsa, Hueslaco, Crystal City, and other towns, mainly resolving in Texas, to set up a political party, and they knew many Mexicans would vote due to similarities and struggles they had in common.
Finally, an organization to finally take a stand in the political run and represent Chicano culture.
It did, but soon enough, the organization would separate, with some members wanting to take a bigger step while most knew it was a bad idea, due to racism in politics and not getting the support, but instead getting ripped apart by the media, which was shown with Los Cincos, the group who had successfully made the local political stand in a reference to the 5 Hispanic candidates who ran for Crystal City. Texas City government in 1963 and 1969 originated in Crystal City. They were a result of Mexican American community organizing against Caucasian domination of the city's government, but soon had to feel due to the getting indicted with a bad check when bringing out the chart, being told that they were not residents who lived there part-time, so they were migrants.
So, in the sense of the political world moving, the 2 of the 3 and then moving 1 more would eliminate the party.
Right, eventually defeating Los Cincos.
However, it must be noted that the struggle didn't exactly start in the classroom. It was already happening in the fields, starting with the poll tax, a southern strategy devised by the Democrats to keep the poor away from the polls and limit who could pay the $1.75. And if you were poor, like in the case for most Mexicans, $1.75 back in 1960 could buy you a 100-pound sack of roasted potatoes, or even a 100-pound sack of beans, which made sense to pay $1.75 to vote between one 50-year-old white Democrat and another one. Didn't make sense. During World War II, the U.S. started the Bracero program, which brought millions of millions of Mexican men into the country as temporary farm laborers.
Yes, the term bracero literally means one who works with their arms. This is a fitting term for these men who worked in dangerous, back-breaking conditions. These men experienced low wages, pesticide exposure, and also poor housing. They were supposed to be protected by federal agreements from the government, but the abuse still persisted within the bosses of the companies. The Hispanics were working for underpaid checks to the point they couldn't pay the poll tax. Also, if you were a farm worker, it was common for the boss to force your hand and to vote for their candidate of choice, of the white candidates who were not interested in helping the Mexican Americans.
And even after the war, the program kept going until 1964. The Bracero program laid the foundation for not only the exploitation of Mexican labor, but also the resistance that would come, which was led by very important leaders, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta.
To start with Chavez, he was born in Arizona in 1927. However, his family lost their land after being swindled by white landowners. They then ended up in California as migrant farm workers, moving from town to town, living in something called barrios. Barrios are populations of Mexicans, and one barrio they ended up living in was called Sal Si Puedes, which literally means get out if you can.
Cesar Chavez saw injustice everywhere. He experienced firsthand segregated schools, racist signs, and brutal working conditions. But Chavez still believed in nonviolence and justice. He was a man who believed heavily in education later in his life, attributing his inspirations to nonviolence and justice by Gandhi, St. Francis, and community organizing. In 1952, Chavez joined the Community Service Organization, also known as CSO, and started registering Latino voters.
Later, in 1962, he co-founded the National Farm Workers Association, which became the United Farm Workers, UFW. Dolores Huerta was a key figure in the UFW who supported Cesar from the very start of the movement. Talk about loyal.
Huerta is equally just as important to the Chicano civil rights movement. She was born in 1930 in New Mexico and shaped by her mother's compassion and activism after being divorced. She experienced injustice in schools as teachers doubted her wit because of her Mexican heritage. Furthermore, her brother was beaten for wearing a zoot suit, which is a common Latino fashion.
Dolores started as a teacher, but then moved to organizing. In 1955, she helped launch the Stockton CSO chapter and met Chavez soon after. They both built a movement of farm workers demanding higher wages, safer working conditions, and union rights.
Their most spotlighted action was in 1965, the Ladron No Grape Strike. This wasn't just a strike, but a national movement. The marches, fasts, and boycotts spread through the country. By 1970, they'd won the union contracts for tens of thousands of workers with the help of Huerta's negotiating assistance.
The Chicano movement wasn't just about labor. It was about reclaiming identity. Chicano activists pushed back against cultural erasure, calling for bilingual education, an increase in ethnic studies, and celebration, not ignorance, of Mexican heritage.
They challenged a system that kept Latinos out of college, out of vote, and out of history. Became known as La Casa, but also known as the cause, or cause of equality, dignity, and representation.
As seen from Chavez, Huerta, and generations of student activists, the fight had led to a splurge of events that in the life that live in the past, present, and future.
As Chavez said, the end of all education should surely be service to others. This signifies what the movement was and is still about. It is about independence and the allowance for indigenous and Mexican cultures to truly celebrate themselves.
And that is now on this overview of the Chicano Civil Rights Movement. Viva la Casa!